The Davenport estate was not merely a house. It was a carefully crafted fantasy. A sprawling, Gatsby-esque mansion perched on the rugged coast of Rhode Island. Its immaculate lawns swept down to a private, moonlit beach where the Atlantic whispered against the shore. On this perfect, starlit June evening, it was the setting for the wedding of the year, a union that graced the covers of society magazines. The marriage of Olivia Sterling, the radiant and universally adored daughter of shipping magnate Thomas Sterling, and Jack Sullivan, a handsome, charismatic architect whose talent was only surpassed by his charm. The reception was a symphony of understated opulence. Champagne, a vintage that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly rent, flowed like water. A string quartet played softly on a terrace overlooking the sea, their melody a delicate counterpoint to the rhythmic crash of the waves. The grand ballroom, with its soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, was a constellation of the East Coast's elite, their diamonds and laughter glittering in the soft, golden light. The air was heavy with the scent of 1,000 white roses and the palpable joy of a celebration in full swing. Olivia, in a Vera Wang gown that seemed spun from moonlight and starlight, was the incandescent center of this perfect universe. She moved through the crowd, her hand resting lightly on her new husband's arm, her smile a beacon of pure, unadulterated happiness. Her life had been one of privilege and expectation, but tonight, all of that had fallen away, leaving only the simple, profound joy of a woman deeply in love. This was the first day of her forever, and it was flawless. In a quiet corner of the terrace, a waiter stood perfectly still, a silver tray of champagne flutes balanced expertly in his hand. He was young, with dark, intense eyes that missed nothing. While the other staff moved with a brisk, professional energy, he moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, not with the deference of a servant, but with the analytical focus of a predator. He watched Olivia. He watched the way she looked at her husband, the way her hand tightened on his arm, the way her laughter echoed across the lawn. With each observation, the polite, professional mask he wore seemed to thin, revealing the cold, hard fury that lay beneath. No one noticed him. He was just part of the scenery, a ghost in a tuxedo. The murder happened in the heart of this perfect, joyous celebration. It was not a crime of stealth or shadow, but a brazen, audacious act of violence that turned a fairy tale into a gothic nightmare. The timeline was tragically precise. At 11:30 p.m., Jack and Olivia, after a final dance under the stars, slipped away from the reception. It was a wedding night tradition, a quiet moment for the newlyweds to escape to the bridal suite, a lavish set of rooms on the second floor, to catch their breath before returning for their grand, sparkler-lit farewell. The guests, happily inebriated and lost in conversation, barely noticed their absence. At 11:55 p.m., the fairy tale shattered. Jack Sullivan came stumbling back into the grand ballroom, his movements clumsy, his bespoke tuxedo disheveled. His face was a mask of utter horror and disbelief, his skin a ghastly, pale white. His hands, held out in front of him as if they were alien appendages, were covered in wet, glistening blood. "Somebody, help!" he choked out, his voice a raw, broken sound that cut through the music and laughter like a scythe. The string quartet faltered into a discordant silence. 100 conversations stopped mid-sentence. A wave of horrified silence washed over the room. "It's Olivia. Oh God, she's..." The bridal suite, a room that had been a sanctuary of romance just minutes before, filled with the scent of roses and the promise of a new life, had been turned into a slaughterhouse. Olivia Sterling Sullivan lay on the pristine white silk of the antique four-poster bed, her Vera Wang gown a canvas for a brutal, blossoming stain of crimson. She had been stabbed, repeatedly, in the chest, the violence of the attack a shocking desecration of the scene's tranquility. A single, perfect white rose, its stem now dipped in her own blood, had been placed gently in her lifeless hand. The scene was a grotesque, horrific tableau, a beautiful moment of love and promise violently, and theatrically, erased. The case was a firestorm. The Sterling family was the closest thing to royalty in the state, and the murder of their daughter on her wedding night in her own bridal suite was an unthinkable, almost Shakespearean tragedy. The media descended on the Davenport estate like vultures, their satellite trucks lining the long, winding drive. The investigation was handed to the state's most seasoned homicide detective, a man whose reputation was almost as legendary as the Sterling's fortune. Detective Miles Corbin. Corbin was a man who moved with a slow, deliberate calm that often belied the sharp, analytical mind working behind his weary eyes. He arrived at the estate to find a scene of controlled chaos. He navigated his way through weeping guests being interviewed by uniformed officers and frantic event staff trying to manage the fallout. His first priority was the groom, who was, by every measure, the primary and only suspect. He found Jack Sullivan in a small, quiet library, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, staring into a cold, dead fireplace. He was being flanked by his family and a high-powered lawyer, but he seemed oblivious to them all. His eyes were vacant with a level of shock so profound it had surpassed grief. Corbin began the delicate, crucial first interview. "Mr. Sullivan," he started, his voice a low, gentle rumble, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened." The story Jack told was a fractured, nightmarish account, the words tumbling out in a broken whisper. "We went upstairs. We were so happy. She was laughing about something my best man had said in his speech. I went into the bathroom, just to splash some water on my face, to take a deep breath. I was only in there for a minute, maybe two. I didn't hear a thing. Not a scream, not a struggle. When I came out, she was on the bed. There was so much blood. I thought it was a joke, a horrible, sick joke. I touched her, and she was so cold." He trailed off, his body racked with a shuddering sob. It was a story that was almost impossible to believe. A killer, slipping into a secure room, in a mansion filled with hundreds of people and a private security team, committing a brutal murder and vanishing without a trace, all in the space of 2 minutes. The obvious conclusion, the one every other cop in the room was thinking, was that the groom had snapped. A sudden, violent argument, a hidden rage, a crime of passion. But Corbin was a man who had spent 30 years looking into the eyes of liars, and he did not see one in Jack Sullivan. He saw a man whose soul had just been ripped out. His shock, his horror, his grief, it was too raw, too real to be a performance. Corbin left the groom and began his own methodical walk of the crime scene. He stood in the doorway of the bridal suite, now a sterile, numbered grid for the forensics team. The air was thick with the chemical smell of luminol and the faint, sweet, cloying scent of roses and blood. Corbin's eyes swept over the room, looking for the discordant note, the detail that didn't fit the narrative of a simple domestic murder. He found it on a small, antique writing desk in the corner of the room. Amidst the scattered, congratulatory cards and telegrams from senators and CEOs, there was one envelope that was different. It was a simple, plain white envelope with no stamp or address. On the front, written in an elegant, almost calligraphic script that was both beautiful and chilling, was a single word, Olivia. Corbin, wearing gloves, carefully slid it open with a penknife. Inside was not a card, but a single high-quality photograph, printed on thick, old-fashioned paper. It was a picture of Olivia taken years ago. She was on a beach, her hair windswept, her face alight with a laugh that was younger, more carefree than the one he had seen in her official engagement photos. Standing beside her, with his arm possessively around her waist, was a handsome, dark-haired young man with intense, brooding eyes. On the back of the photograph, the same elegant script had written a simple, chilling message. "You made a promise. Till death do us part." This was not a random act of violence. This was not a wedding night argument that had spun out of control. This was a premeditated execution. A message. And it was signed by a ghost from the bride's past. Corbin's entire investigation pivoted on that single photograph. He was no longer just investigating a murder. He was excavating a life, searching for the identity of the intense young man with the possessive grip. He went back to the Sterling family. He found Olivia's father, Thomas Sterling, a powerful, broken man. In his study, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. Thomas Sterling looked at the photo, and a shadow of recognition, and a deep, profound pain crossed his face. "His name is Julian Croft," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. He was her first love, her college sweetheart. They were inseparable for 3 years. He was an artist, a painter. Brilliant, they said, but intense, passionate, too passionate. "What happened to him?" Corbin asked. "Olivia ended it," the father explained, his gaze distant. "About 5 years ago. He wanted to get married, to run away to Paris and live a bohemian life. But he wasn't right for her. He had no ambition, no prospects beyond his art. He was possessive, prone to these dark, jealous moods. His passion, it had a frightening side. I encouraged her to break it off, to choose a more stable future. She was heartbroken, but she was a practical girl. She knew it was the right thing to do. She met Jack a year later. She was finally truly happy. And what happened to Julian Croft?" "He took it very badly," Thomas Sterling said, a tremor in his voice. "He wouldn't accept it. He sent her letters, dozens of them. He called at all hours. He begged. When she finally refused to see him or speak to him ever again, he just vanished. We heard through a mutual friend that he had moved to Europe to study art in Florence or Paris. We never heard from him again. We assumed he had moved on. We were wrong. The ghost now had a name. Julian Croft, the spurned, obsessive ex-lover. The motive was now terrifyingly clear, written on the back of the photograph. A toxic cocktail of a love that had curdled into obsession and a promise that had been twisted into a murderous threat. The next step was to find him. But how do you find a man who had intentionally dropped off the face of the earth 5 years ago? A man who could be anywhere in the world. Corbin started with the wedding itself. A killer this audacious, this theatrical, had to have been there. He had to have witnessed his own handiwork. Corbin began the monumental task of vetting every single person who had been on the estate grounds that night. The 300 guests, and, more importantly, the hundreds of temporary staff. The caterers, the florists, the valet company, the string quartet. On a hunch, he sent the photograph of Julian Croft to the heads of all the contracting companies. The call came back a day later, from the owner of the high-end catering service that had provided the waitstaff. The man's voice was shaking with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Yes, that's him. He worked for us that night. He used the name Michael Pierce. He was a last-minute replacement for one of our regulars who called in sick with the flu. He had a resume, references. They must have been fake. He was quiet, professional, an excellent worker. He worked the party for 5 hours. He served champagne. He smiled at the guests. And then, he just vanished right before the incident. He never even came back to collect his pay. The killer had not snuck into the wedding. He had been hiding in plain sight, wearing a tuxedo and a polite smile, moving silently amongst his enemies, his heart filled with a cold, patient, and murderous rage. He had served his own beloved the champagne to toast her new life, all the while planning to bring that life to a brutal, bloody, and theatrical end. The revelation that the killer had been one of the wedding caterers was both a breakthrough and a chilling confirmation of his audacity. Julian Croft had not been a phantom, slipping through a security cordon. He had been an invited guest, in a sense, wearing the perfect camouflage of a servant's uniform. He had walked the same halls, breathed the same air as his victims, his face a mask of professional courtesy, hiding a maelstrom of obsessive rage. Detective Corbin's investigation now had a clear, singular focus: to find Julian Croft. But the man who had called himself Michael Pierce had vanished as completely as a puff of smoke. The catering company had a sparse, and almost certainly fake, file on him. The address was a vacant lot in a rough part of the city. The social security number was a fabrication. He had been paid in cash for his shift. He was a ghost, a man who had seemingly mastered the art of living without a trace. Corbin knew that to find the man Julian Croft was now, he had to understand the man he had been. He and his team began a deep, forensic dive into his past, trying to resurrect the digital ghost he had worked so hard to erase. They started with his college years at the Rhode Island School of Design, the time when he and Olivia Sterling had been the art school's golden, if volatile, couple. They spoke to old college friends, art professors, and roommates. A consistent and deeply unsettling portrait began to emerge. Julian was remembered as brilliantly talented, a painter with a raw, prodigious gift that made him the star of the department. But he was also described as intense, brooding, and frighteningly possessive. Corbin's first key interview was with Olivia's maid of honor, a sharp, successful art gallery owner named Chloe, who had been friends with both Olivia and Julian in college. They met in her chic, minimalist Soho gallery, surrounded by challenging, modern art. He didn't just love Olivia, Chloe said, her eyes distant, her voice filled with a retrospective sadness. He consumed her. She was his muse, his entire world. His art, his grades, his mood-set all revolved around her. He painted her obsessively, hundreds of portraits. When she was with him, he was this brilliant, charismatic force of nature. But if she even had lunch with a male friend, or stayed late at the library without telling him, he would descend into these dark, silent rages. I remember one time, at a party, she was talking to another artist, and Julian came over, didn't say a word, just grabbed her by the arm and pulled her out. The look in his eyes. It wasn't just jealousy. It was ownership. I told her then that it was unhealthy, but she was young and in love with his talent, his passion. She thought it was romantic. They found his old art professor, an elderly man named Alistair Finch, who remembered Julian with a mixture of awe and profound sadness. He had more raw talent than any student I've ever taught, the professor said, gesturing to a student painting on his office wall. But his work had no discipline, no intellectual rigor. It was all pure, chaotic emotion. And it was all about one subject, Olivia. Every canvas, every sketch. After she left him, his art fell apart. It became dark, violent, almost unhinged. He submitted a final project that was just a series of canvases he had slashed with a knife and splattered with red paint. It was a cry of psychic pain. He dropped out of the master's program shortly after. And then, he was just gone. The psychological profile was clear. A man with narcissistic and obsessive-compulsive tendencies, whose entire sense of self-worth had been pathologically wrapped up in a single person. Olivia's rejection was not just a heartbreak. It was a fundamental annihilation of his identity. A man like that doesn't just get over it. He festers. He obsesses. He plans. The digital trail remained stubbornly cold. For 5 years, Julian Croft had managed to live completely off the grid. No credit cards, no bank accounts in his name, no social media, no apartment leases. But Corbin believed that no one could exist in the modern world without leaving some kind of footprint, however faint. The break came from a deep web forensics unit, a team of young, brilliant cyber detectives who could navigate the darker, more anonymous corners of the internet. They weren't looking for Julian Croft's name. They were looking for his art. Corbin's team had collected high-resolution images of Julian's student work from the university archives. The tech unit began running those images through sophisticated stylistic recognition software, searching for matches on art forums, collectors' sites, and the anonymous galleries of the dark web. After weeks of sifting through terabytes of data, they found him. On a small, encrypted European art forum that specialized in what it called transgressive and outsider art, they found a series of new paintings, posted under the pseudonym Nemo, Latin for no one. The style was unmistakable. It was Julian's raw, emotional brushwork, the same frenetic energy, the same bold use of color. But the subject matter had changed. He was no longer painting portraits of love. He was painting a meticulous, obsessive chronicle of his planned revenge. The paintings were a gallery of his psychosis. There were dozens of images of Olivia, but they were twisted, grotesque. Olivia as a pale, beautiful corpse bride. Olivia in a coffin, surrounded by dying roses. Olivia with a single bloody knife wound in her chest. And the most recent series, posted just a month before the wedding, was a chilling step-by-step storyboard of his crime. There was a painting titled The Camouflage, showing a man in a waiter's uniform, his face lost in shadow, serving champagne at a lavish party. There was a painting titled The Last Dance, showing a bride and groom, their faces smiling but their eyes dead and empty. And the final, most horrific painting, titled The Consummation, was of a bride lying on a pristine white bed, a single, blood-red rose clutched in her hand. He had not just committed a murder. He had rehearsed it, obsessively, on canvas, for years, turning his revenge into his life's great, terrible work of art. The paintings were his confession, his manifesto, and they were also his undoing. The anonymous Nemo had to get paid for his work. The forum used an untraceable cryptocurrency for its transactions, allowing the artist to remain a ghost. But to convert that cryptocurrency into real-world money, he had to have a bank account somewhere. Working with international law enforcement agencies, the cyber team began the painstaking process of following the crypto trail. It was a dizzying, global chase, through a labyrinth of digital wallets, mixers, and shell corporations designed to launder the untraceable funds. But they finally found a weak link. A series of cash withdrawals, all made over the past 2 years, all from a single anonymous ATM in a small, sleepy fishing village on the coast of Portugal. Julian Croft was no longer a ghost. He had a location. Corbin and a small team flew to Portugal, working with the local Polícia Judiciária. The village was a quiet, sun-drenched place of whitewashed walls and cobblestone streets, a world away from the gothic gloom of the Rhode Island coast. They showed Julian's photograph, both his old college ID and a new, age-progressed sketch, to the locals. First, no one recognized him. He was not living as an artist. He was living as a shadow. But then, an elderly woman who ran a small grocery store, a place that sold bread, wine, and fishing tackle, recognized the face. "Ah, the quiet man," she said in Portuguese, her face crinkling in recognition. "O homem quieto. He comes in once a week, always late at night, always pays in cash. He rents the old, abandoned fisherman's cottage at the edge of the cliffs. No one has lived there for years. They say it is haunted." The cottage was isolated, perched on a rugged cliff overlooking the Atlantic, a mirror image of the setting of the wedding. It was a place where a man could hide and watch the sea and nurse a 5-year-old grudge until it had blossomed into a murderous obsession. They raided the cottage at dawn, a team of armed Portuguese police moving in silently. The cottage was sparse, almost monastic. A bed, a table, a chair. But the walls were not bare. One wall was covered, from floor to ceiling, with hundreds of images of Olivia. Old photographs, sketches, newspaper clippings of her engagement announcement, and new, terrifying paintings. It was a shrine to his obsession, a timeline of a love that had curdled into a psychosis. Julian Croft was not there. He was gone, but he had left in a hurry. A half-eaten meal of bread and cheese was on the table, and on his easel, a new, unfinished painting was still wet. It was a self-portrait. In it, he was on an airplane, looking out the window at the clouds. And in the reflection in the glass, the unmistakable skyline of New York City was visible. He hadn't fled to Portugal to hide forever. He had fled there to plan, to prepare, to become a ghost. And now, his great work complete, he was coming home. But why? The revenge was complete. Olivia was dead. What was left? Corbin's blood ran cold as the final, terrible piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The revenge was not just about Olivia. It was about destroying her perfect new life, everything she had chosen over him. And that new life had included a husband. He raced back to his hotel and made a frantic transatlantic call to his partner back in the States. "Get a protection detail on Jack Sullivan. Now!" Corbin yelled into the phone, the urgency raw in his voice. "The killer is on his way back. He's not finished. The wedding was just the first act. He's coming back for the groom." The flight back from Portugal was a race against time, a transatlantic chase against a killer who was now a ghost in the wind. Detective Corbin knew that Julian Croft was not a common criminal who would be caught by a standard airport dragnet. He was intelligent, meticulous, and had been living as a phantom for 5 years. He would have fake passports, multiple identities. He could be on any plane, heading to any city. All Corbin knew for sure was that he was coming back to America, and his final target was Jack Sullivan. Back in Rhode Island, a fortress of security was thrown up around the grieving groom. Jack, who had been living in a state of numb, medicated shock since Olivia's murder, was moved to a secure, undisclosed location, a sterile, anonymous safe house on a quiet, unremarkable street. He was a man already living in a private hell, and now he was a prisoner in it, the last living symbol of a life that Julian Croft was determined to completely erase. Corbin's team worked around the clock, trying to predict Croft's next move. They put alerts on every passenger manifest for every flight from Europe, cross-referencing names with a dozen known aliases. They circulated his photo, both old and new, to every law enforcement agency in the country. But it was like looking for a single, specific grain of sand in a hurricane. Days turned into a week. The tension was unbearable. Jack Sullivan, under 24-hour police protection, began to feel like a man on death row, waiting for an execution he could not prevent. He was haunted by the what-ifs, by the memories of a love that had been so brutally extinguished. The break, when it came, was not from a customs agent or a sharp-eyed airport cop. Came from the art world. Corbin, acting on a desperate hunch born from the psychological profile of a supreme narcissist, had sent an alert, along with Julian's photograph and his dark web pseudonym Nemo, to a small, elite unit at Interpol that specialized in stolen and illicit art. He had a theory that a man as pathologically arrogant as Croft, a man whose entire identity was tied to his art, would not be able to resist the temptation to admire his own work, to somehow witness its impact on the world. The alert got a hit. An art gallery owner in Soho, New York, a man who specialized in controversial, transgressive art, had been contacted by a mysterious, wealthy European collector. The collector, communicating through an encrypted email service, had expressed a passionate interest in acquiring the works of the anonymous, underground artist known as Nemo. The collector had arranged for a private viewing at the gallery, to be held that very evening. The collector, the gallery owner said, was flying in from Zurich and had been very specific and very generous with the arrangements. The viewing was to be private, after hours, with minimal security, to preserve the integrity of the artistic experience. Corbin knew, with a certainty that electrified him, that this was it. The collector was Julian Croft. He wasn't just coming back to kill Jack. He was coming back for a victory lap. He was coming back to anonymously attend his own coming-out party as a great and controversial artist, to bask in the glory of the very paintings that chronicled his murderous obsession. It was an act of supreme psychopathic arrogance, and it was going to be his downfall. The plan was set into motion with a speed and precision that left no room for error. The NYPD, working with Corbin's team, set up a sting operation. They replaced the gallery's minimal security with a team of their own elite undercover SWAT officers, disguised as art handlers, gallery assistants, and even a bartender for the private champagne service Croft had requested. They rigged the gallery with hidden cameras and microphones, turning the chic, minimalist space into a high-tech mousetrap. They instructed the gallery owner, who was now a terrified but cooperating witness, to proceed with the viewing as planned. That night, the Soho Gallery was a stage set for a final, deadly performance. Corbin and his team watched from a surveillance van across the street, their eyes glued to a bank of monitors. The tension was a physical thing, a tight knot in Corbin's chest. At 10 p.m., a black town car, the kind that is ubiquitous and anonymous in the city, pulled up. A man got out. He was not the dark, brooding artist from the college photos. He was older, thinner, with his hair cut short and dyed a sandy blonde. He wore expensive, impeccably tailored clothes and thick, horn-rimmed glasses. He looked like a Swiss banker, an anonymous man of wealth and taste. But the intense, burning eyes were the same. It was Julian Croft. He walked into the gallery, and the trap was sprung. He was greeted by the nervous gallery owner and led into the main exhibition space, where his own dark, twisted paintings hung on the pristine white walls. He walked among them, a small, satisfied smile on his face, a creator admiring his creations. He stood for a long time in front of the consummation, his gaze lingering on the painted face of the dead Olivia, a look of profound, twisted love in his eyes. He was so absorbed in his own dark glory that he didn't notice the art handlers slowly, silently closing in around him, their hands inching towards the concealed weapons beneath their jackets. Corbin decided to play the final scene. He picked up a microphone connected to a hidden speaker in the gallery. "It's a powerful collection, Julian." Corbin's voice, calm and clear, echoed through the silent gallery. "But you're missing the final piece, the self-portrait." Croft didn't panic. He didn't run. He just turned his head slowly, his smile never wavering, a look of almost amused recognition in his eyes. He knew the game was up, but he was not a man who would be taken easily. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. The SWAT team moved in, their voices a sudden, violent roar, yelling for him to drop his weapon. But it was not a gun he pulled out. It was a small, ornate silver box, like an antique snuff box. He opened it and threw a cloud of fine, white powder into the air. It was a potent, fast-acting mixture of tear gas and a powerful, disorienting hallucinogen. The gallery was instantly filled with a thick, choking cloud. The officers, caught by surprise, were disoriented, their training fighting against the sudden, violent assault on their senses. In the chaos, Croft moved like a wraith. He had planned for this contingency. He kicked over a heavy, marble pedestal, sending a priceless sculpture crashing through the gallery's massive, plate glass window, creating a shower of glass and a route of escape to the dark Soho street. He was a blur, a shadow, about to dart through the opening, back into the anonymity of the night, when one of the younger, less affected officers, his eyes streaming but his aim true, managed to fire a taser, its twin prongs hitting Croft squarely in the back. He convulsed and went down hard in the shower of broken glass. Even then, he fought with a feral, desperate strength, his body fueled by a pure, psychopathic rage. It took 3 officers to finally subdue him and get him in cuffs. The interrogation was a study in unrepentant narcissism. Julian Croft did not confess. He boasted. He recounted the murder of Olivia with a chilling, artistic detachment, as if describing the process of creating his magnum opus. "She was my greatest creation," he said, his eyes alight with a feverish, manic energy, even as he sat, cuffed, in the bare, sterile room. "And she betrayed me. She chose mediocrity, a life of suburban comfort with an architect, a man who designs shopping malls. It was an insult to my art, to my love. So I corrected it. I finished the piece. I turned her into a masterpiece. Perfect, tragic, final tableau. Her death was my greatest work. It will hang in the museum of her memory forever." He showed no remorse, no guilt, only a profound, twisted sense of artistic and personal vindication. He had not just killed a woman. He believed he had elevated her to the level of immortal art, a tragic muse for his dark genius. As for Jack Sullivan, Croft simply sneered. The architect. He was just the frame. Unimportant, disposable. I was going to remove him, of course, to complete the composition. A final, satisfying brushstroke to clean up the canvas. Julian Croft was found to be criminally sane. His meticulous planning and execution a testament to his clear, if monstrous, state of mind. He was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in a maximum security psychiatric facility, a place where his only audience would be the sterile white walls of his cell. Months later, Corbin visited Jack Sullivan. The police protection was gone, but the man was still living in a prison of his own grief. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the memory of a perfect day that had ended in an unthinkable nightmare. They stood together on the windswept lawn of the Davenport estate, which was now for sale, its fairy tale magic forever tainted. They looked out at the gray, indifferent sea. There were no easy answers, no comforting words to offer. The fairy tale had been irrevocably shattered. "Why?" Jack asked, his voice a raw whisper, a question he would ask himself for the rest of his life. "I still don't understand why." Corbin thought of Julian Croft, the brilliant, broken artist, and his gallery of obsessive madness, a love so total and selfish it could only end in destruction. Because, Corbin said, his voice heavy with the weight of the tragedy, for some people, love isn't something they feel, it's something they own. And he couldn't stand the thought of his most prized possession belonging to anyone else.